My sister announced her pregnancy the same weekend I got my bar exam results, at dinner, with champagne she'd already chilled. My mother looked at me across the table and said, "Sweetie, maybe law school wasn't the right path for you anyway. Your sister needs us right now. Can you move back home to help her?" She said it the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. Like my 3 years of sacrifice, my $180,000 in debt, my sleepless nights with highlighters and cold coffee, all of it was a scheduling conflict she needed me to clear. I smiled. I said, "I'll think about it." I didn't cry until I got to my car, but by the time I reached my apartment, I had already stopped crying because I realized something. They had just told me exactly where I stood, and now I knew exactly where to stand when everything came apart. Have you ever had a major achievement completely erased by someone else's news in your own family? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my life, I was the responsible one, which in my family was just another way of saying invisible. My sister Danielle is 4 years younger than me. She's always been the one people noticed first. Not because she was smarter or kinder, but because she was louder, prettier in the way that made rooms turn, and she knew how to make my parents feel needed. When Danielle cried, my mother rearranged her schedule. When I cried, my mother told me I was being sensitive. It started small, the way these things always do. When I was 15, I won a regional essay competition. My prize was a $500 scholarship and a certificate that got framed at the school. My parents forgot to come to the ceremony. They were at Danielle's dance recital. She was 11. It was not a recital that would be remembered by history. When I got home holding my certificate, my father looked up from the couch and said, "Oh, that was today?" My mother was already asking Danielle if she wanted ice cream. I told myself it was fine. I was the older one. I was supposed to be independent. So I became independent. I got a part-time job at 16. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I paid for my own prom dress, my own AP exam fees, my own college application costs. Not because my parents couldn't afford to help, but because asking felt pointless. The money always found its way to Danielle anyway. New clothes for her auditions, a car for her 20th birthday, a deposit on her first apartment when she decided to move to Nashville to pursue music for 8 months before quietly moving back. None of it was ever discussed as a loan. Meanwhile, I was building something quietly and alone. I graduated undergrad with honors. I worked 2 jobs during law school. I passed the bar on my first attempt, which fewer than half of test takers do in my state. I joined a mid-sized firm doing contract and employment law. I was good at it. I was very good at it. But at home, I was still the daughter who had chosen a difficult path and therefore couldn't expect much sympathy when it was hard. Danielle, who had drifted through 4 career attempts and was currently doing social media management for a local boutique, was still the one my parents worried about, checked on, showed up for. I had stopped needing them to show up. That was, apparently, my fault. The pregnancy announcement changed the temperature in the house in a way I hadn't anticipated. My parents didn't just become excited, they became consumed. My mother started going to Danielle's OB appointments. My father quietly mentioned that they were thinking about renovating the spare bedroom at their house into a nursery, in case Danielle needed to stay with them. When I pointed out that Danielle had her own apartment 20 minutes away and a boyfriend who was present and employed, my mother looked at me like I had said something cruel. "She's going to need support," my mother said. "I needed support too," I said, when I was in law school, when I was studying for the bar. "That was your choice, Claire." So is her pregnancy. My mother changed the subject. My father pretended to be very interested in his food. 3 weeks later, Danielle's boyfriend Marcus proposed. The family exploded with joy. A wedding date was set for the following September. My parents immediately began discussing how they could help. My mother pulled up venue websites at the kitchen table the next Sunday. My father talked about what he could contribute financially. The number he mentioned was not small. I sat there and did the math in my head. I knew what my parents had in savings. I knew because 2 years earlier, my father had asked me, as the lawyer in the family, to help them review their estate documents. I had done it for free, naturally. I had spent 12 hours of my time reviewing, flagging, and explaining. I knew exactly what they had and where it was. What my father was casually offering to put toward Danielle's wedding was more than twice what they had contributed to my entire education, which was 0. I didn't say anything at the table, but I started paying attention. The next month was a cascade of requests that came dressed up as family obligation. Could I review the venue contract? I was the lawyer after all. Could I look at the catering agreement and flag anything unusual? Could I call the florist because there was a clause about cancellation fees and they didn't understand it? Could I? Each ask came from my mother. always framed as it would only take you a few minutes and you know we don't understand this stuff. What went unacknowledged was that a few minutes of my time was billable at $290 an hour. What also went unacknowledged was that I was doing all of this while managing a full caseload, while Danielle was being taken to cake tastings. Then came the request that I should have refused but didn't. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon while I was between client meetings. She asked if I could be the one to coordinate with the wedding planner going forward because Danielle was overwhelmed, and the planner had a lot of legal-style paperwork, and nobody else in the family was comfortable with documents. "Mom," I said slowly, "I have a job." "It's just emails, Claire. My emails are billable. Don't be like that. This is family." I was quiet for a moment. What does Danielle do all day that she can't handle her own wedding emails? My mother's voice dropped to the tone she used when she wanted me to feel ashamed of myself. "She is growing a human being, Claire. The least you can do is be supportive. You don't have a husband. You don't have children. You have time." There it was, the sentence that had been living under every interaction for years, finally dressed and standing in the open. "You don't have a life that counts, so your time belongs to us." I took a breath. "Fine," I said. "Send me the planner's contact." The word tasted exactly the way I knew it would. What my mother did not know was that the wedding planner worked for a venue called Hargrove House, a historic property on the edge of the city that had recently been acquired as part of a portfolio purchase. The acquisition had been handled by a firm that contracted my firm for due diligence review. I had been one of the reviewing attorneys, which meant I had read every line of every Hargrove House operating contract, including the vendor agreements, including the morality and conduct clauses that had been updated 8 months earlier after an incident with a previous client. I knew exactly what those clauses said. I had helped draft the language. I said nothing about this to anyone. I just said fine, and I sent the planner an introductory email and I started reading. What I found in the first week of reviewing Danielle's wedding documents was not what I expected. The venue deposit had already been paid, $95,000, non-refundable under standard terms. My parents had not used savings. I checked the timeline against what I knew of their finances. The timeline didn't fit savings. I called my father on a pretense of asking about a detail in the contract and worked the conversation carefully. Within 10 minutes, I had confirmed what I suspected. They had taken out a home equity line of credit. Their house, which they had owned free and clear since 2019, now had $120,000 drawn against it. For a wedding, for a daughter who earned a comfortable income, whose fiancé owned a landscaping business with 12 employees, who had every resource to fund her own celebration, my parents had borrowed against the only financial security they had left in retirement, because saying no to Danielle had never been something they knew how to do. I sat with that for a long time. I wasn't angry in the hot, immediate way. I was angry in the cold way that sits in your chest and calcifies into something useful. I kept coordinating. I kept reviewing. I kept sending emails and flagging contract terms and showing up to the role they had assigned me, the helpful invisible one. And I kept reading. Marcus, Danielle's fiancé, had a business. I had already known this. What I had not looked at carefully until now was the business structure. As part of my general habit of thoroughness, I pulled the state registration for Hartwell Landscaping LLC. The registered agent was Marcus. The co-owner listed was Danielle. 40%. I looked at this for a while. Then I looked at the business financials that were publicly adjacent, the tax liens, the permit records, the court filings index. It took me 2 evenings and a Saturday morning. What I found was not criminal, not exactly, but it was the kind of thing that a person who knew what to look for would call a significant liability. Marcus had 2 unresolved breach of contract claims filed against Hartwell Landscaping in civil court. Both were from commercial clients. Both alleged that work had been invoiced and paid for in full, but not completed to specification. The total exposure was just over $140,000. The cases were not widely known because small civil cases rarely are. But they were real, documented, and moving toward trial dates. Danielle was listed as a co-owner. If judgment went against the business, her personal assets could be exposed, depending on how the LLC had been structured at formation. I pulled the formation documents. The operating agreement had a flaw in the liability shield language, the kind of drafting error that a non-lawyer would never catch, but that a judge absolutely would. My sister was about to walk into a marriage to a man whose business was facing 6 figures in liability, with a personal exposure risk she had no idea existed, funded by her parents' retirement equity, coordinated by the sister she had spent years treating as staff. I closed my laptop. I made tea. I thought about this for 3 days. I want to be clear about what I did next and why. I did not do it for revenge. I did it because I am a lawyer. And when you know about a material risk that will harm someone you are, in whatever fractured and complicated way, still connected to, you have an ethical obligation to disclose it. Even if that someone has never once asked you how you were doing, even if your mother called your time worthless, even if your father couldn't remember what day you passed the bar. I called Danielle. She answered on the third ring with the particular distracted energy she always had with me, like I was mildly inconvenient background noise. "Hey," she said, "did you talk to the florist yet?" "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "Not about the wedding, about Marcus's business." "Silence," I told her. "Not everything, not immediately, but the core of it, clearly and without drama. There are 2 pending civil cases. There is a liability exposure. Your name is on the LLC. The operating agreement has a structural problem. You need an independent attorney to review this before you get married, and before any more family money goes into joint assets." She was quiet for a long moment. "How do you know all this?" she finally asked. "Because you asked me to review your contracts, and I'm a lawyer, and this is what lawyers do when they review contracts. They look at the whole picture. Marcus would have told me if there was a problem. Maybe he didn't think it was a problem," I said. "Or maybe he didn't understand the exposure. I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm telling you what the documents say." Another long silence. Then, "I have to call Mom." She hung up. Within an hour, my mother called me. She was not calm. "What did you say to your sister?" "I told her about a legal liability she needed to know about." "You upset her. She's 7 months pregnant, Claire. How could you do this right before her wedding?" "Mom, she is co-owner of a business with $140,000 in pending civil judgments and a defective liability shield. If she marries Marcus without addressing this and those judgments come through, her personal savings are at risk. Our parents' money is at risk. I told her because it's my job to tell her. You just can't stand to see her happy." I took the phone away from my ear for a moment and looked at the ceiling of my office. There is a water stain up there, shaped roughly like Florida. I have looked at it many times when I need a moment. "I'm going to send Danielle a written summary of everything I found," I said. "She can take it to any other attorney and have them confirm it. I'm not asking her to call off the wedding. I'm asking her to protect herself. That's all I've ever done in this family. Protect myself, because no one else was going to." My mother said I was dramatic. She said I was jealous. She said this was exactly why it was hard to include me in things. I sent the summary anyway. What happened next was not what I expected, and I want to be honest about that, because I had prepared myself for the version where everyone stayed angry at me forever. Marcus, when confronted with the documents, did not deny them. He had known about the civil cases. He had not told Danielle because he had convinced himself they would settle for much less than the claim amounts. He had not told her about the LLC structure problem because he had not understood it himself. When his own attorney reviewed what I had sent, the attorney confirmed every finding and added 2 I had missed. The wedding was not called off. It was postponed 4 months while Marcus worked with his attorney to negotiate settlements on both cases and restructure the LLC operating agreement properly. Danielle hired a family law attorney, separate from me, to review the full asset picture before they married. During those 4 months, my parents were furious with me in the way that people are furious when they have been forced to see something they preferred not to see. My mother did not call me for 6 weeks. My father sent one text that said only, "You didn't have to do it like that." I wrote back, "There was no other way that would have worked, and you know it." He didn't respond, but he also didn't disagree. Here is the part that people who don't come from families like mine will find hard to understand. When you are the one who always does the right thing in a family that rewards the wrong things, being correct is not enough. Being helpful is not enough. Being the responsible one is not enough. You can be all of those things perfectly and still be the one who gets the call asking you to move home and help with someone else's pregnancy. Still be the one whose bar exam results get toasted with champagne, originally bought for a different occasion. The structure of the thing is the problem, not any single moment. What changed, slowly and imperfectly, was that Danielle called me 6 weeks before the rescheduled wedding. Not my mother, Danielle herself. "I want you to be my maid of honor," she said. "I know that's weird to ask after everything. You don't have to say yes." I was quiet long enough that she said, "Claire?" "I'm here," I said. "Can I ask you something first?" "Yeah. Did you know? About the bar exam. Did you know that was the same weekend as your announcement?" A long pause. "No," she said quietly. "Mom told me you had some work thing. I didn't know until like 2 months ago when she mentioned it offhand and I looked up the dates. Another pause. I should have called then. I didn't know what to say. You could have said congratulations, I said. I know. Her voice was small in a way I had not heard since we were children. I'm sorry, Claire, I really am. I became her maid of honor. The wedding was smaller than originally planned, which I think was actually an improvement. My parents were there. My mother cried during the vows, which she always does, and I handed her a tissue, which I always do. Before the reception started, my father found me standing near the window in the anteroom. He stood next to me for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "The estate documents, the ones you reviewed. You saved us about $40,000 in probate fees with that work. I never actually thanked you for that." I looked at him. He was looking out the window. "No," I said, "you didn't." "I'm sorry," he cleared his throat, "for a lot of things. Not just that." It wasn't a long speech. It wasn't a scene from a movie, but it was real, and it was his, and I had waited long enough that I knew the difference. At the reception, Marcus gave a toast. He talked about how the postponement had been hard, but that starting the marriage with full transparency had made them stronger. He thanked the person whose attention to detail had made that possible. He looked at me when he said it. Danielle looked at me too. My mother, from 2 seats away, also looked at me. She looked like someone rearranging furniture inside themselves, like she was moving something heavy to a place where she should have put it a long time ago. I raised my glass. I didn't need the toast. I didn't need the acknowledgement, not the way I once would have, back when I was 15 with a certificate and an empty auditorium and a family that had somewhere else to be. I had built a life that didn't require their validation to stand up straight. That was the thing they never understood about me. I wasn't waiting for them to invest in me. I had already invested in myself. But I won't pretend it didn't feel like something to finally be seen. Even late, even imperfectly. A few months after the wedding, Danielle called me with a question about a lease agreement for a small studio she was converting into a home office. A normal question. A Tuesday phone call between sisters about something ordinary. We talked for 40 minutes. About the lease, about the baby, about a documentary we had both watched, about nothing in particular. When we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of my apartment, the one I had chosen and paid for and filled with exactly what I wanted, the apartment that had never asked me to be smaller or louder or different. Some families teach you your worth by what they give you. Mine taught me my worth by what they withheld. I learned to build in the silence they left behind. I learned to know the value of a contract, the weight of a clause, the cost of a signature. They thought the most useful thing I could be was a resource they could pull from without refilling. They didn't know I had already read the fine print on that arrangement. And I had decided not to renew it.